Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. So it is the return of one of my favorite elements of PvE in the game, a challenge tournament. Specifically, the challenge for today is, or the next few days rather, is Dragon, but with champions only from the Sacred Order. I always tend to enjoy these because it's a kind of a fresh take on an old piece of content where you're restricted to certain factions or groups of factions. And so just kind of, what can you come up with based on who you have on your account in order to deal with it? And it's not always going to be a super efficient team in terms of speed. It just depends who you have, and so it's kind of just refreshing. But that's just my take on it. Let me know in the comment section down below if you agree with that assessment. But anyways, here we are in the tournament itself. So this tournament is going to be important for a couple of reasons depending upon your goals. If you are participating in the summon pool, which I did already cover in a free-to-play review, you can check that out in the card up above on the right hand side. There are the prism fragments here, the air quotes free summon for the summon pool up for grabs here, then 2100 points. If you're going for some milestones in the Titan event, then 1750 is where you'd want to get to at least secure those points. And otherwise than that, then it's just a good time to be running Dragon in general because there's a 3x on speed gear, but you don't necessarily have to restrict yourself to the one singular faction to get or take advantage of that. However, you can also check your group just to see if you have, if people aren't participating. In this case, you can see that some people are pretty much going ham. So they're pretty far along, and it's only been a couple of hours since the event has been live, but you could get yourself some relentless gear, maybe some of the event relic fragments and whatnot. So it kind of depends on the difficulty of your group, but always check and see if it's feasible for you to sneak a win in there in case people are just relatively inactive because they just don't care about challenge tournaments. Now thankfully Dragon is the easiest dungeon in the game, easiest core dungeon in the game, so it is not the trickiest to just kind of slap some champions together and get a decent run time. But nonetheless, there are some things you do want to consider here. First of all, just in case in terms of the stages you want to farm, there is absolutely no shame in dropping down to normal mode and just farming something that's quick and efficient. So stage 16 will still work. It's Void Affinity. It's very easy, and you still have a chance to get 6-star gear. You can farm stage 20, which is still the most efficient stage in terms of points per energy, especially when it comes to these niche tournaments like this one. And so you can get the best bang for your buck in terms of energy spent, in terms of that, but also still get 5- and 6-star gear. If you want to step it up a little bit, you can do stage 25 of normal mode. Just changes the affinities. It gets a little bit harder. Enemy max HP is capped and whatnot, so you have to worry about that a little bit more. And then if you want to really challenge yourself, which I have done in this case, you can flip over to hard mode to come up with some team to run here. And it doesn't really change that much between normal and hard mode. Just the dragon hits a lot harder, puts a lot more poisons out there, and he's just a little bit more dangerous, but the core strategies of dealing with the boss remain the same. The incentive, of course, of running higher stages in hard mode and or normal mode just means you get better gear quality, but you're being less efficient with your energy, so there is a trade-off there. Now in this case, I have a couple of teams to show you, one for normal mode stage 25, but this is kind of a proxy for any team you would run on normal mode. I tried to fill it with as many accessible champions as possible, assuming you did at least the Lady Noelle fusion a couple years ago. But then I also do have a hard mode stage 10 team, which is the team that I'll be running for myself in terms of getting the best gear quality, just again to take advantage of the fact that there is boosted rates on speed gear. But anyways, the core concept of dealing with Dragon is as normal, kind of, you can bring in some poisons. In this case, I'm just trying to show you a strategy where we kind of just brute force it. We're not really worrying about the poison at all. We do have HP burn from Mordecai in there, but he's mostly in there for the increased attack for the nukers. Deacon is probably the best debuffer for this squad. He's the most accessible one unless you have a Venus on your account. Lots of turn meter, lots of AoE decrease defense, and then the leech as well in the A1. Lady Noelle is our kind of support, but she's also our CC, so the AoE freeze is handy. Also is a revive, single target heal that can kind of become a little bit of an AoE heal, and then block buffs on the A1. And then these slots are just whoever you have that can deal damage to the waves. And now I don't have Ezio built on my account, but this is an excellent time if you did happen to build him over the past couple of weeks after getting him. Then Ezio is definitely the way to go. He brings poisons, potentially some damage if you build him for damage, but also just poison explosion as well. So I think he's a good pick, but like I said, on my account he's not built, so I couldn't really make use of him, so I just went with the brute force strategy of just two nukers here. And so Phenax here is our primary nuker, and then Errol is just kind of a secondary nuker. So let's go ahead and run this team so we can see it in action. Like I said, it's pretty straightforward, but it is definitely a brute force concept. So like I said, Deacon here is our primary debuffer. He's our decreased defense champion. If I was, you know, being a little bit more deliberate here, I would speed tune it such that Mordecai was faster than Fennec, so he has increased attack before he uses his abilities. But you know, since this is just an example team, I'm not going to go around rebuilding all my champions. I typically don't do that anyways for these challenge tournaments. I try to use them as they are, unless I absolutely need to change their gear in order to have success on the run here. But yeah, like I said, Errol for me is just kind of filling a slot as another source of damage. The primary damage dealer for me is just the epic of Fanax. So whenever he gets around through his abilities, he will eventually kill everyone, unless Errol can do a little bit of work. But yeah. So in terms of AI overrides, I didn't really do all that much. I know I turned off Fanax's A3 just because it's just the weakest ability in his kit. You get more damage from him using his A1 because it's a double hitter. Obviously, we already have decreased defense from Deacon, so we don't really need that. Also, it's not 100% chance anyways. I think Errol has free reign. Deacon actually has free reign. I know sometimes you can, you know, set it up such that he only like open or don't uses on the AoE decreased defense, but he spams it so often with his cycling of his abilities that I just felt it wasn't really that necessary. I think Mordecai has free reign as well, then Lady Noelle also has free reign. So it's pretty open. You don't really need, like I said, this is a brute force strategy, so you don't really need to worry that much about, you know, ability tuning. It's just more about trying to make sure that there is as efficient as possible. So about 90 seconds or so to get through the waves. Again, we're not really bringing in any poisons. The HP burn AoE does a little bit of damage, but primarily we're just kind of nuking them. And unfortunately, you know, it does suck that, you know, freeze is kind of reducing the physical damage that the enemies are taking, but it's better than them taking turns is what I find. So at least when you're running a Lady Noelle composition where the freeze is also her revive, so you could run the risk of having her not freeze, but then she also can't revive if anything goes wrong on the waves. So that can be a really, really bad situation in my opinion. So it doesn't feel worth it. But anyways, yeah. So we should be done here in, I think, just under 3 minutes, give or take. I think that's where my results have fallen out in testing. But it's on normal mode, you know, the dragon is relatively speaking slow, so there's not a ton to really worry about. And eventually we're just going to kind of DPS him down here. Obviously, it would be a lot more efficient to have some sort of poison damage, because for those who don't know, all dragons in the game are immune to turn meter control. So you can see their Deacon tried to decrease his turn meter and nothing happened. He's also immune to decreased speed. So that's why poisons are one of the best forms of dealing with a dragon, because you cannot slow him down at all whatsoever, or any dragon for that matter. And so you can just take advantage of him having to take turns, and thus he will poison, or is it a her? I forget. It doesn't matter. But the dragon will poison itself every time it takes a turn. So it's kind of, or take poison damage if you can get some poisons on the team. So yeah, just under 3 minutes there. Pretty clean run. Like I said, this is more of a brute force strategy where we're just using debuffing and nukers and a little bit of CC to get our way through. And then the burns do a little bit of damage, but you know, if you have Ezio, I do think that's a little bit more efficient in terms of placing poisons and activating poisons. Switching over to hard mode stage 10, like I said, this is the team that I will be running on my account. And so we have pretty much the same core of the Deacon being our debuffer, Fanax being our wave DPS, Lady Noelle being our support CC champion. But now we're adding in the poisons just to be a little bit more reliable when we get to the dragon, because he's a lot faster. And we do have to care a little bit more about poisons are a little bit more important here. We don't want to just depend on DPS to deal the damage when we get to the boss phase, just because he's going to cycle through his turns a lot faster, and that purple bar from his secret skill is a lot thicker to deal with. And then in terms of improving survivability, I'm just throwing in Wixwell here just from my testing. He was the best option here because he's bringing in the decrease attack, which is useful, of course, for reducing our damage, but also increased defense, and the shield means that we will take less damage, or you know, even if we take poison damage, then some of that will go into the shield. Anyways, let's go ahead and run this team and talk a little bit more about the composition. So in my case, I've had Corvus the Corruptor for a very, very long time, and he hasn't really seen much play, but I did book him for some reason way back in the day, and so he did come in handy in this particular niche. I probably will do the same eventually to Ezio in terms of building him out and booking him out, just in anticipation of future events like this one, where it's not necessarily just Sacred Order only. I obviously know that because of Basim and Ezio, this is why they're doing Sacred Order only, which makes sense. But just in general, for some sort of future challenge tournament, where there's some dragon, maybe with Talarian League or something like that dragon, it'd be useful to have him on my account because he's a poison exploder, which is useful, but I'd probably run them together. Anyways, so Corvus is our primary poisoner. You can see there he has lots of poisons out there. He's a double hitter with 2 poisons per hit, so lots of poisons out there, but also he can extend debuffs on his A2, which is obviously useful, so that we have lots of poisons out there on the waves, but also on the dragon. And yeah, we don't have to worry about the enemy mobs taking any turns whatsoever, because we have the AoE freeze from Lady Noelle like before, but also we do have the A1 cycling of the provoke from Wixwell. So in terms of Wixwell's AI overrides, everyone else is the same. I have open or don't use on Corvus, so he doesn't waste the poisons when they don't need to be, but he can extend them as needed throughout the fight. Deacon has free reign once again. Wixwell, I've turned off his A3 on the waves because we just don't need it. If they do happen to take a turn like they are here, it doesn't really matter because Lady Noelle can freeze them right there. And or if anyone happened to have died for some reason, then she could also revive them with said freeze. So we don't really have to worry as much about that happening. But ideally, they don't take any turns, just because, you know, Cardinal would revive everyone. It's just really annoying, and it just takes a little bit longer, but it's not the end of the world. But yeah, Fennax, same thing. We turned off his A3, but he's free to use the A1 and the A2 during the waves. I guess for the bossy, only A1s. And then Wixwell, we do turn on his abilities when we get back to, or when we get to wave 3, because we do care more about him placing the buffs and whatnot. I think Wixwell is also open or don't use on his A2, so in case they do get a turn, they have decreased attack on them. So here we go. This is the important part. So now we have our protection from Wixwell with the shield, so that can tank some of the damage. I did purposefully set up Lady Noelle so that she starts off wave 3 with the A1 to put out the block buffs, so that we can prevent the dragon from getting increased attack. And then we follow it up with the subsequent turn there, where we can place decreased attack. So at this point, we're basically locked in and free from any bad situations here. Of course, there's always a 3% chance that things can get resisted, but that is relatively speaking unlikely. So the only downside here to this particular composition is that we don't have a way to protect Fennax from getting the decreased attack, which will happen right now, and it's on for 2 turns. If I had my choice, somehow I wish I could set it up such that Lady Noelle would purge him. I think she typically purges Deacon, just because he's the lead, and he's one of the 2 champions who doesn't have resistance on this team. We'll take a look at the builds later, of course, but that would be like the only change if I could make a change somehow to tune the team. There you go. Yeah, she purged Deacon. I could put Fennax in the lead to make force her more to do that, but then we just forfeit the speed ore, and I think the speed ore is a little bit more important, just so that we stay ahead of the dragon. But yeah, doesn't really matter. So you can see there, we have poisons on there for basically ever. Corvus is going to repeatedly come back and place them as needed, but also just come around and extend the duration of them. And so we're pretty much always guaranteed to break the purple bar, if not through raw damage, just through poison damage as well. I guess both of them combined. And yeah, so between the debuff extension and also just the Deacon turn meter fills and everyone just kind of cycling through their abilities, we don't really have to worry about any of the debuffs really falling off for too long. They might fall off a little bit for like 1 turn or something, but they're not going to fall off for a very, very long time. So you don't really have to worry about a random, big hit crit doing some damage to us. Now, unfortunately, this team is a decent amount slower. The waves are a lot tankier. The boss is a little bit faster, so he takes more turns. We take more damage. Again, we have decreased attack on us, so our nuker does a little bit less damage. So you can see Fennax only doing 4.6. Corvus doing a lot of poison damage. That's where most of his damage comes from. And normally I'd prefer to get my dungeon teams under like the 3-minute mark, but in this case, just because again I don't have Ezreal built on my account, that would be a lot faster. I'd probably drop Fennax and just go for the double poison explosion composition. That would just be a little bit better, but that's just not what I have access to, unfortunately, at the time. So that's just how, for me, that's just how I'm running the team, and it's just super safe, and that's all that really matters. I only have to do this for a couple of days and then it's done forever. And so I try to go with teams that work but are relatively fast, and so this is a nice combination of the two. And then look at that, we got 2 speed pieces right out of the gate. So the drop fever is definitely on and in effect. All right, so as promised, let's take a look at the champions used on these teams and talk about their builds. And I am going to try something new this time. Let me know if you guys want or prefer this format. But when it comes to the masteries, I'm just going to show you the image of the masteries, and you can pause it if you would like to kind of take a deeper look, but I'm not going to deep dive all the masteries. But if you prefer the old way where I kind of go through and talk about why I made certain choices, then you can let me know in the comment section down below. But well, we'll do a little bit of a beta test here. But nonetheless, let's start off with my Mordecai build. He is in Reflex and Immortal, and in terms of his total stats, 55,000 on the HP, 3,400 on the defense, 240 on the speed, and then 400 on the accuracy. I do use this guy in the Nether Spider. That's why he's built in Reflex. I turn off his A2, and then he just spams his AoE HP burn as much as possible. Mortals just to heal him up a little bit for other pieces of content, and the Reflex, again, is just to reduce the cooldown of his abilities. Don't run him with a relic. He's not really essential to have a relic on. He just has one job, place burns, cycle through his turns. He is booked, of course, because he is an epic, and I've just had Chainbreaker on him for forever. Not that it really does anything, but if he does happen to get CC'd, he has a chance to purge it off, but that's probably not the most efficient one. And then as we looked at earlier, these are the masteries. Next up, we have Errol, who is just in gear. He's not in good gear, he's just in gear. So he has a savage set, but it is definitely like 8th quality type savage, so it's just whatever's left over from other people. So his stats are not going to be that amazing. Really squishy there, 33,000 on the HP, 52k or 5,200 on the attack, 213 on the speed, only 79% crit rate, I believe, on all of his abilities. He has an extra 30% chance to inflict a critical hit, so you only need to build him to 70% crit rate. And then he has 225 on the crit damage, relatively low, and then we don't care about his accuracy or his resistance. As we just flashed up on the screen there, there's no relic here, but he's not booked, not awakened, not anything, so he's just there as any DPS. So that could be whoever you have who fits the affinity requirements of whatever stage you're running. Doesn't have to be Errol. And so yeah, mine's just in gear, but he's not really built all that well. And then no masteries, because I genuinely do not use this champion, but he's come in handy, I think, in a couple of instances. You know, such as this one. So he does have gear on, but it's not he's not a quintessential champion on my account. As opposed to Fenax, who's one of my favorite epics in the game, and I did recently rebuild him. I was inspired by I think it was Nubraid's video about showcasing like the people one-shotting the event dungeon boss, but they put their Fenaxes in 6-piece Merciless. And for the longest time, I had mine in Lethal, and I was just like, you know what? I think I can spare some Merciless gear and just put him in that, so he just hits a little bit harder and sacrifice some of his other stats. But anyways, yep, 6-piece Merciless is the build on my Fenax now. And then in terms of the total stats here, 43,000 on the HP, 6.7k on the attack, 246 on the speed, almost 300% on the crit damage, full crit rate, of course, and then a little bit of accuracy as well, 300, so that he can land his debuffs in, you know, sort of a PvE content like we showed today. Now, obviously, I'm getting a ton of stats from the blessing and the empowerment and all that other stuff, so your Fenax probably won't hit as hard as mine is, but nonetheless, that's just how it is. In terms of a relic, I do have the Draught of Ire on him. He just deals more damage when using their default skill when his other abilities are on cooldown. Now, obviously, since I'm not using his A3, I don't really get most of the use out of this ability, so I might want to change this to something else in the future. But nonetheless, that's just the relic I have on him. Maybe a Malefic Talon makes a little bit more sense. He is fully booked, of course. He's an epic. Crushing Rend is on him. I wish it was 6-star, but I only pulled the 5-star, and it doesn't feel worth it to use my Super Essence for a 6-star on Fenax, just because he's not that important. But these are the masteries, of course, we're ending on Helm Smasher. Next up, we have Deacon Armstrong, who's just in the smattering of speed / feral gear. So, you know, accuracy, speed, support is typically how you build a Deacon. And he's not one of my like main Terminator boosters in Arena. That's why he's kind of has hand-me-down gear. But nonetheless, total stats here is 69,000 on the HP, 3,400 on the defense, 296 on the speed. So he's still pretty quick, but not one of my fastest champions. I have a couple of champions that are in the upper 300s, lower 400s at this point, in terms of the ones that are actually important. But nonetheless, 550 on the accuracy, so he can do some work in sort of niche situations, just as this one. In terms of a relic, Journal of Necrotos, just a baseline level 1, but it is a good relic for him. Terminator boosting effects are increased. He is fully booked. Once again, he is an epic. I like to run Cruelty on my debuffers of all types, just because they already decrease defense, so this helps them do it a little bit better. Then when it comes to the masteries, these are the masteries here. War Master, of course, as the T6. Next up, we have my Corvus the Corruptor, who I did tweak his build a little bit. He was a little on the slower side relative to Hard Mode Dragon 10, so I did rebuild him a little bit to speed him up, but the gear pieces are the gear sets are identical. So 2 pieces of Stone Skin for the resistance, and then double Perception for the accuracy. And he is built in a high accuracy, high resistance build, as we'll see here. 59,000 on the HP, 3,600 on the defense, 259 on the speed, so the goal there was to be above 250. 450 resistance is enough that the dragon is not going to land his debuffs, you know, 90 7% of the time, and then 352 accuracy is enough, 350 would be enough rather, to land your debuffs 97% of the time. That's just how the 3% limit goes. In terms of a relic, he does not have one. In terms of booking, I mentioned he is booked. I booked him a long time ago in anticipation of some sort of event like this one, just because AoE poisoners are relatively rare. It's, you know, per faction they may or may not exist, and so I knew that eventually he would do something, and I was you know, two years later I was right. But yeah, Ezio is probably going to be in the same camp here, but no blessing on him. But yeah, just fully booked. And then no masteries because he's not really a core champion on my account, but he does fit into these niche situations such as this one. Next up, we have Lady Noelle, who is kind of underutilized relative to how most people run her on their accounts, but nonetheless, she does have a decent amount of gear on. She is important, of course, in hard mode faction wars. Her build is similar to that of Corvus, as we just looked at. So double stone, or 2 pieces of stone skin for the resistance, and double perception for the accuracy, and then 1 piece of ferro for the extra accuracy. So in terms of her stats, 64,000 on the HP, 3,500 on the defense, 259 on the speed, and then 463 on the resistance, 400 on the accuracy. So again, 450 plus on the resistance, 350 plus on the accuracy was the target. But granted, for hard mode faction wars, I opted to push her to 400 accuracy just because some of those higher end stages mobs have a little bit more resistance than the norm. No relic on her either. She's not really one of my core champions. She is fully booked though, and I do have Brimstone as the blessing at 1 star. And then for the masteries, she doesn't actually have them. I originally was going to give her masteries because I thought I was going to run her in Chimera, but she didn't really pan out as effectively as I wanted for that. So for me, she doesn't have any masteries at all. And then last but not least, we have Vault Keeper Wixwell, who is in protection, 4-piece protection set. We didn't probably notice it that much because it's not really that important. The dragon doesn't trip any buffs, but nonetheless, he has a chance, 24% chance to protect some of his debuffs that he places. And then I threw that alongside a perception set to give him the accuracy. Similar build as we talked about to the other 2 champions. So 68,000 on the HP, 5,200 on the defense, 264 on the speed, 450 on the accuracy, and then 344 or 451 on the resistance rather, and then 344 on the accuracy. So again, 450 resistance, 350 accuracy are our general targets. And then when it comes to the relic, there is not one. When it comes to booking, he is fully booked. I do have intimidating presence on him, which is probably not the best, but that's just the one that I chose whenever I got his 3-star from something. I think maybe it was a Soulstone or one of those events. And then he does have a little bit of masteries done. I originally used him a little bit more. It's kind of like a flex spot in the arena, but he has since fallen out of that role. So I don't really use Wixwell that much. I do not employ Titus compositions on my account in particular, so he's not really that used. He's just kind of sitting in the vault. But he proved useful in this particular instance. He's also a good Hydra champion, of course, but I don't use him for that either. But yeah, decreased attack was helpful for the success of the hard mode team. Now, of course, you might be saying, I don't have those specific champions, so what are my other options in terms of champions we could use from the Sacred Order? So let's go through a couple of options that you could use depending upon their category. So starting off with poison / HP burn. Again, that's probably the most, poisons at least, are the most important or the best way to deal damage to the dragon. The waves, it can be the best way depending upon your composition. Again, poison explosion is very, very strong, particularly in the dragon, because poison is also useful on the dragon. So I think it's more meta than running a seer comp, for example, but I digress. So obviously we highlighted Corvus on my team, and I will note, just pointing out here, that Corvus's ability is on a 4-turn cooldown, so he is a bit weaker in terms of the poisoners placing his abilities, but it is a relatively strong ability because it's 4 poisons on an AoE. Ezio, like I mentioned, is probably the best option. He's free. We all just got him recently. Here you get 2 poisons and poison sensitivity, so a little bit of overlap with Corvus. I would probably, if you do have Corvus or some other poisoners, I would have Ezio be the slowest relative to them so that he can place the last 2 poisons and then also detonate them if they're under 4 or more debuffs, which they will be, again, if you set them up with some other poisoners. Or you can just have Ezio kind of place his ability or cycle through his abilities twice, place the poisons on the first rotation, and then on the second rotation come back and activate them and play some more. It just depends on who you have on your roster. When it comes to the epics, technically Juliana can play some poisons. Granted, it's on a single target here, but it's a double hitter that can place 2 poisons for 3 turns as long as she crits. Sanguinia, kind of a sleeper pick, but if you want to run some sort of damage reflection type strategy, as long as you build her with enough accuracy, whenever the dragon takes his first turn, puts poisons on you, you can remove all debuff from all allies except this champion and then transfer them to the target, which would be the dragon. So kind of like a Jing Wan or a Green Ward Ruark, except it's an AoE team removal or a team cleanse, and then you just throw them all back at the dragon. So if you have absolutely no poisons at your disposal whatsoever, you come up with some way to get through the waves, and Sanguinia on a 4-turn cooldown can just throw the poisons back to the dragon, and that can be your way of dealing with the dragon. And then honorable mention to Aothar, who can 4 times at random can play some poison. So kind of like Juliana, once you get to the dragon, or kind of like a Frozen Banshee type strategy, you carry him to the dragon, and then you just get a quad hitter that places poisons on a 3-turn cooldown, which can be relatively effective. Then in terms of HP burn, there's really limited options, but we talked about Mordecai. But again, he's primarily in there for the increased attack, but nonetheless, you could run him as kind of just a secondary damage in terms of the AoE HP burn. Next up, for the debuffing category, there are very few options. So you either have Venus, if she's a void legendary, so you probably don't have her. And so most people like myself are going to be running the lovely and ever powerful Deacon Armstrong. So I think he's the best option. He's one of the strongest debuffers for epics in the game, and so he works just fine if you don't have a Venus. And then for supports, there's a long list of champions that you could use. But if you're struggling to stay alive, you can run Roshkard, block damage for 2 turns, AoE. You can run Glacea, the buffed Glacea, now that she has a 100% chance to place freeze. But also notably, she can place block debuffs on your team, so you can prevent yourself from getting poisons and or other debuffs. Wixwell, we highlighted, the increased defense and the shield and decreased attack is good for keeping your team alive and running. In a similar vein, you have Martyr, increased defense and counterattack, which can take a little bit more time in terms of animations, but also the AoE provoke can be a little bit of CC as needed. Artor, Udex Artor, champion chase champion for free that we got sometime last year. He's okay, decent healer on the A1, but more importantly, a reviver if you need it. And then I forget what the A2 does actually. Increase attack and strength. Yeah, turn meter fail. So just a little bit of turn meter manipulation for your team. You can always run, of course, the Christmas couple if you happen to have them. You'll be permanently unkillable with Sir Nick and Lady Noelle, or you can run Lady Noelle separately, as I kind of did there. I didn't have to need the services of Sir Nick, but you can use them together, of course. When it comes to cardio, another void legendary, but nonetheless, full cleanse, block debuffs is useful, of course, going into the dragon's poisons. Ally attack is just kind of helpful. That would be really strong to pair with Fanax if you do run them together, in fairness. And then when it comes to the epics, we talked about Sanguina. She's definitely a support, but she's also, I put her in the poison category. But honorable mention to Godseeker Neri, who's the other, relatively accessible reviver that you might have on your team, but she's also a decent healer as well. So there you have it. That's going to do it for my strategy for the Sacred Order only Dragon tournament. Let me know in the comment section down below if you plan to participate in this specific challenge tournament, and let me know, of course, what team you're going to be running and how long your team is taking and what stage you're running. Of course, that does matter as well. Be sure to check your group, because like I said at the top of the video, there is a chance that your group could be relatively or lacking participation, so you could snag some free rewards or some high tier rewards depending upon how active your group is. So just always check before you just give up on not doing it for whatever reason you might have for wanting to skip it. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel, and feel free to hit the subscribe button down below as well if and only if you're enjoying the content overall on this channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.